Best music compilation.
It's time for the final word in sports all across the state. You're listening to Sports Talk with your hosts, Bill Kornblut, Will Pelagic, and the Professor Tom Hayes. You've been waiting all day, so join the show now by calling 800-956-7266.
And good evening, everybody. Welcome to Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network, here on a Thursday night, capping off a beautiful, beautiful day in the Palmetto State. Phil Kornblut and Will Pelagic, Professor Tom Hayes back at our studios in downtown Columbia, along with Brian Leonard. We are located at Founders Park in Columbia, as USC, like all the other major college baseball programs across the country, prepares to begin practice tomorrow. The long run to Omaha for the Gamecocks and Coach Mark Kingston. They hope that will begin tomorrow and will continue on into the latter part of June. We are going to jump right into our visit with Coach Kingston because his schedule is such that he needs to be with us early, and we're glad that he is here. Thank you so much for coming over.
My pleasure. Glad to have you guys here over at Founders, and we're up in the press box overlooking the beautiful field lit up and the city in the background, so it's about as good as it gets.
Well, it felt like a baseball day today.
It did. It's getting warm. It had a little bit of rain last night, so we had to be careful about being on the infield, but we got a lot of work done, small group type stuff, and tomorrow's our first official team practice, so we can't wait.
Listening to you yesterday at your press conference, it was interesting in that, though this is year 2, like you said, it kind of feels like year 1 because you actually had a copy of the roster. Now that you needed it, I think you're trying to make a point. We got a lot of new faces, a lot of new names to learn with this baseball team.
Yeah, we sure do. For our fans, if they come out and watch us at scrimmages this weekend, I would encourage them to bring their rosters that they can print off the internet. I've done a number of speaking engagements, as you might imagine. A lot of fans around here that want us to come speak to them. And when I talk to them, I let them know we need a new catcher, a new third baseman, a new shortstop, a new second baseman, a new first baseman, a new right fielder, 3 new weekend starters, and a new closer. That's what we lost off of last year's team. So it's a big challenge, but we've got some really good players ready to step up. We've got some really good new players in. So, it might not be a finished product on opening day, but I think there's some pieces there to do some damage.
Going into year number 2, Coach, how did year 2 meet your expectations of not just, what you expected coming in, prestige, following, the personnel? How did that all kind of fit for you?
Yeah, in terms of what I expected when I got here, I think I had a pretty good handle. I'm a student of baseball. I'm a student of college baseball, so I kind of knew what South Carolina meant to the community, to the state. I know what the name meant nationally, so I wouldn't say I was surprised by anything. I knew what the Clemson, South Carolina series was all about because I watched a ton of videos on it, talked to a lot of people. I just enjoyed seeing it from the inside. Everything I thought it would be, it has been, from a fan support standpoint, from a resources standpoint, from an ability to recruit the best players. Everything that I thought it would be, it has been. It's really, really nice to be on the inside and be a part of it.
You talk about your team for this year, and one of the key players, you mentioned him yesterday, is your catcher, Chris Cullen, who has kind of struggled in his career, but you've made it clear to him that he's got an opportunity to step in and be the guy, and you need him to be the guy, or you need somebody back there, kind of like Taylor did last year and stepped up and gave you a big year. Surprisingly, you're hopeful of the same situation this year?
I am, and I think Chris Cullen is primed to do that. He's been a name guy in this program for a long time. I think he was a heavily recruited kid coming out of Georgia 4 years ago and had big expectations coming into what he would be for this program. And he's had some good years, but just hasn't had that breakout year. So he knows this is it. It's do or die time for him. And he's gotten himself into great shape. He's moving around better than he ever has. He's hitting the ball very well. And I think he's given himself a chance to have a great senior year, just like Hunter Taylor did. Last year, we challenged Hunter Taylor, who had a mediocre career up until his senior year. We challenged him to get in the best shape of his life, give it the best go you can, and the guy became an elite player. 9 homers, which was 8 more, I think, than he had career-wise. And I think Chris has given himself a chance to have a very similar story.
Well, Coach, as you work with your team early on, learning the names, learning what these guys can do, and you got a pitching staff with a lot of question marks. How much emphasis have you put early on defense? Don't have any, 4 and 5 out innings, that sort of thing.
Well, that's always going to be the case. We have a thing around here that's 27 outs is what we're going to give our opponents. We cannot give them extra outs, and regardless of the year, you always need to make sure that one of the foundations of your team is playing great defense. And so we work extremely hard on our defense. We're going to make sure that guys are in the right position from a scouting standpoint. I mentioned in the press conference yesterday, I think with a couple of our returning pitchers, we can do a better job getting guys in the right spots for where they give up balls hit. So defense will always be a premium. Last year, one of the things we were proud of is that we became one of the top. I think we're in the top 10 defense nationally. Fielded 980 as a team, which was tremendous.
45 errors all season.
Yeah, so that's always going to be a primary emphasis for us.
Less than 3.5 weeks to baseball season starting. Mark Kingston, head coach of South Carolina, joining us as we continue our around the state previews of baseball season coming up. You mentioned the fact that there's a lot of new names and a lot of new faces. Best to your knowledge, who can fans expect out there on the field that they haven't heard before?
Well, that's a good question because there's going to be a lot of them. I would say two new outfielders that you definitely need to be familiar with are Andrew Eister and Brady Allen, two Florida kids, two kids that were drafted last year. They could have gone pro, but decided to come here and play for us at South Carolina. I think you'll see a lot of them on the corner outfield. I think Dylan Harley is a new pitcher, a freshman pitcher from here in the state of South Carolina that has a chance to really open some eyes. He was up to 94 yesterday, and is a kid that is a proven winner everywhere he's been. You're going to have a new shortstop. Obviously, two JUCO guys between Khalil and Neville are fighting to win that job right now.
That's Australia versus Fairfax, Virginia.
Yeah,
by
how
the way.
about that?
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So Noah Campbell is settled in at second base and has made great improvement offensively and defensively. Josiah Seitler is a kid you may see on opening day at first base, a kid that was a 12th rounder of the Reds, but just needs more polish, has big-time power, just needs to continue to learn how to play the game. So that along with some of the new pitchers, Sweat, Lloyd, Lehman, Reed Morgan, JUCO, those are JUCO guys sprinkled in with a couple freshmen. There's a lot of new faces, and there's a lot of good players in there. So the biggest thing is how quickly can we as a coaching staff get them up to speed so that they can compete and win at this level.
You mentioned Campbell. We've talked about Cullen and another guy who is returning who's probably going to be invaluable for you is TJ Hopkins, and keeping him healthy. You said yesterday, when he's healthy, on top of his game, he's as good as anybody in college baseball.
Without question. He's a five-tool player. He's a gamer. He's a winner. He's been born and bred to be a Gamecock. Could have gone pro last year, but just didn't want to leave this place yet. So that's a guy you really root for. And if he stays healthy, he'll be as good a player as anybody has in the country in center field. I'll put him up with anybody. I wouldn't trade him if he's healthy for any other center fielder in America. And so we just need to make sure we do a good job of managing his workload outside of games. Today, for example, he was taking a few rounds. He hit a ball out of the ballpark, and I said, all right, that's it. You're good. So with him, he doesn't need a heavy workload getting ready. We just need to get him enough work to stay sharp and stay healthy.
All right, we've got a break coming up. We'll hold you over for a few more minutes, and then we'll cut you loose to go do whatever it is you got to do on this Thursday night, because this is it, right?
It's got to learn all the names.
You got to say goodbye to all the family, right? Because now you're going to be locked into camp, and it's baseball for the next 6 months or so.
Well, luckily, family likes being at the ballpark as well, so now it's time to meld it all together.
We come back, we'll talk a little bit more about personnel, and also we'll talk about some of the changes here at the ballpark, because this beautiful place is still beautiful, and it's going to be even nicer for the fans in terms of what you're going to present to them. And also just the way it looks to their eye. We'll talk about some of those things coming up here in just a moment when we come back to Founders Park in Columbia on a night that would be great for two. Could have played one this afternoon and one tonight. Split night doubleheader.
Twilight action?
Yeah.
Is that what you want?
Yeah. All right, we'll be right back here on Sports Talk.
This is the place to talk Tigers, Gamecocks, and more. Sports talk across the state on the South Carolina Radio Network.
Welcome back to Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network, as we are back here at Founders Park, home of the baseball Gamecocks, and baseball coach Mark Kingston kind enough to spend another couple minutes with us. And going back to your comments yesterday in front of the assembled media, you talked about your pitching in a very speculative way. It's Carmen Majinski, and then we'll see kind of from that standpoint. And you said you mentioned conversations with major league teams, and the man to my left is very afraid of change. So I'm sure this is a very enlightening portion for him. What was the biggest thing you learned from your conversations in the major leagues?
The biggest thing I would say is that they are trying to find ways now to win as many matchups throughout a game as you possibly can. In other words, there's 27 outs to get. What is the best way to tilt? How many of those matchups for those 27 outs can be in your favor? And sometimes that's by getting your starter out after he's faced every hitter twice, because the stats show that third time through the order, the batting average for each hitter goes up about another 40 points. So that's something, if you know that, maybe if you have an elite guy, let him go. It's 7 innings, they can overcome some of those stats. But if you have guys still trying to get their feet wet, if you have guys that maybe are good for 2 or 3 innings at a time, there are ways to use them. And ideally, you want to have your 3 workhorses. You want to have your closer. You want to have your setup man. You want to have a few middle guys and maybe a lefty matchup guy. But until we know who those guys are and until we know that we have that, then we're going to have to be creative. At the end of the day, you just need to win the game. And so the more matchups you can get where it gives you an advantage, I think the better. So it doesn't mean we're going to all of a sudden try to reinvent the wheel and change the game, but we need to be creative and try to win games.
Yeah, you talked about going and talking with the Rays a good bit, and everybody saw what they did. The move they made with their pitching sparked them to an incredible finish. If the Red Sox and the Yankees weren't having such a big year themselves, I mean, they'd have been right in it. They've still won 90-something games, I believe.
No question. And I'm sure the before the season, they were probably predicted to win maybe 80 to 81 games.
Yeah.
And so
they started with this opener.
Yes.
Guy and at the back of the bullpen, as you mentioned yesterday, an opener and da-da-da-da. Is that something you're toying with in your head as you look at this pitching staff?
Not yet. Early in the season, we'll start out traditional, and with an idea of not overusing guys. I think we'll have more arms that we can look at this year that can get us an inning here, 2 innings there, where last year was a little bit more condensed in terms of we probably went 7 or 8 deep. I think we're deeper this year with guys that you can put out there and expect to get some outs. So we'll start the year probably traditional and then figure out, what can we rely on and go old school with, and where do we need to get creative.
You mentioned you mentioned a lot of guys yesterday, but in particular, you mentioned John Gilreath, maybe one you can count on in your rotation. And at the in the closer's role, Sawyer Bridges, who you said is looking very good, is healthy, and you feel good about him to close things out for you?
Yeah, no doubt. I think if you look at our staff right now, it starts with Carmen as the Friday night guy. He's most likely going to be the opening day starter. And then it ends, the back of the bullpen is Sawyer Bridges. And so we've got to figure out a lot of in between those guys. But Sawyer Bridges had a 1.35 ERA last year. He's a gamer. He's a guy that loves the big moment. He's a guy that wants the ball when it really matters. And he's got really good stuff. So all those things make him the perfect candidate to be our closer. And if we have 3 outs to get with him on the mound, I feel like we'll win. The other things, obviously, we need to figure out. We've got some JUCO guys that are being considered to start. We've got some freshmen that are being considered to start. And you've got guys like Shook and Gilreath that if they take the next step, they could be usable guys in the rotation as well. So again, it's 3 weeks now to figure it out, but even sometimes when you get into the season, you still don't have it all figured out quite like you think you do.
Coach, you said you were grooming your freshman, Josiah Seitler, to be your first baseman, but is any wheels turning in your head that you might want to see him on the mound as you talked about matchups to see what he can do as far as being a left-handed pitcher is concerned?
Yeah, Josiah Seitler a few years ago in high school was a pitcher and could get it up there 88, 89 miles an hour. But then he was at a professional showcase tournament and dove in the outfield for a ball and tore his labrum of his throwing shoulder. So from an arm standpoint, he hasn't been the same throwing the baseball since then. So for now, he's going to just be a position player because of that injury. Maybe down the road, that's something we can look at. But for now, as a freshman, we're just going to ask him to totally focus on being a position player.
I made the remark before you get out of here, Coach, that you could recruit based on just this ballpark alone, just because of how amazing it is compared to what the rest of college baseball brings. It's minor league level park, and you're making some manicured changes, the new scoreboard, we're seeing some new signage. For those who aren't sitting here with us, what can you describe about what you guys are going to have new in the park next year?
Well, number one, I think the first thing that people will notice is that big scoreboard. And I don't think it'll be operational this weekend for Fan Appreciation Day, which we're really excited about, just to kind of reach out to our fans and let them know even before the season how excited we are to start this again. That new scoreboard is going to be tremendous. It's high def. The old one was analog and the old fashioned type TV. It takes up now the entire scoreboard. From what used to just be one little panel up there. So I think that's going to be tremendous for our fans, for our players, and really raise the level of entertainment here at Founders. We're also, our fans will notice a lot of aesthetic improvements around the ballpark, out on the outfield walls, just a lot of signage and decals up on the right field wall celebrating the history of this program, which I think is really important for us to celebrate the history and tradition of this program. You'll see some more national championship signs out on the outfield wall. So I just think it'll really make it a really nice environment. It's already a tremendous environment, just always looking to make things better, because as we know, LSU's not going anywhere. Arkansas is not going anywhere. Florida's not going anywhere. Mississippi State's not going anywhere. So we need to constantly be trying to make this place better every year.
Before we let you go, I mean, last year was an interesting year. You're sitting there after losing to Presbyterian on a Tuesday night. I was here, got here sixth inning. And you're 20-17, and people are like, where's this place going? And all of a sudden, it just took off. You had the best record in the SEC over the last half of the season. You come within one win of Omaha. How do you digest all of that experience and somehow maybe try and carry that over some to this year? Is that possible?
Well, I just think from the coaching staff standpoint, our first opportunity being here, you kind of get a feel for what it takes. Obviously, you know that you can't win every game. You can't go undefeated in your league in the SEC. You just can't do it. So you need to be able to weather the storm. And that's what I think we did a good job last year of doing, is weathering the storm. When it got, that Presbyterian game, with all due respect to them, that was not a game we should lose. And we had to have some really big heart-to-hearts at that point. We had to make adjustments in personnel. We had to make adjustments in roles. We had to make adjustments in how we were training for weekends. A lot of different adjustments we had to make. And so what I learned over the course of the year is just don't panic. Stay the course. It's a long season. There's going to be some ups. There's going to be some downs. As the leader of the program, I think the clubhouse wants a leader that stays pretty consistent and stable, not somebody that's up and down, going crazy, good or bad. So, at the end of the day, that's what I learned as the head coach of this program, is stay stable so the players stay stable, and just constantly be looking for those adjustments that might help turn your season around, because that's clearly what happened last year.
And there's also some hunger for the guys who stayed around, who were that win short of Omaha as well. Yeah,
no doubt. And, obviously all coaches would love to say we have everybody back to really build on that. But this team really is okay, we need to start over a little bit. You've got a few guys there that were in Arkansas playing, trying to get to Omaha. But the truth of the matter is most of those guys are not here. So these guys need to get a feel for that. Next year at this time, we'll have a lot of this team back, and we'll be able to build off of this year. But for now, last year was great, but turn the page. It's time to start over.
Listen, we thank you for coming out and visiting with us here, giving us a good inside look at your team for this year. Looking forward to it. It's always a great time when the Gamecock baseball is ongoing. I know your fans are very excited about another year.
Us too. So we can't wait to get out on the field. And again, it starts this weekend with practice and our Fan Appreciation Day on Saturday. So can't wait to see this ballpark filling up.
We thank you so much. Thanks for joining us tonight.
You got it. Anytime.
You got it.
Coach.
All right, Mark Kingston, coach of the Gamecock baseball team, with us here at Founders Park in downtown Columbia. We're not going anywhere. He's leaving, but we're staying, and we'll be right back.
I will say this. After talking to Coach Kingston, baseball in a way is very much like basketball, Corn, just because of the fact that you basically are forced to reload quickly with a lot of the parts that you have developing. And even so, when you look at some of the recruiting class stuff, guys you don't necessarily have in the fold sometimes don't even end up on campus because of the draft and things of that nature. And what looked like, again, probably a pessimistic opening to the season, he seems I would say, encouraged by just what the upside of this team could be, because it seems like the ceiling is very, very high, even though they might be starting the year kind of with some uncertainty.
Well, you have to remember, this is South Carolina baseball. South Carolina baseball is the equivalent of Duke, North Carolina basketball, Kansas basketball. It's an elite program.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's changed hands a couple of times from Ray Tanner to Chad Holbrook and now to Mark Kingston, it's still an elite program. Came within a whisker of making it to Omaha last year. And you know, it took a little while for Kingston and crew to kind of settle in, perhaps, and like he said, find roles and players to adapt to them, et cetera. Once they did, about midway through, we talked about it, 37 games or 20-17, they took off. And so I say that because, yes, they've got some unknowns and some new people, but you know they recruit at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the players that they are recruiting are players who were recruited at the highest level. The pros liked them, whether they were JUCO players. You know, you don't look at JUCO players in baseball the same way you might in other sports.
No.
Because there's a lot of really good high school players who go to junior college simply because they want to play a year and maybe go pro, or play a year and then go to college, to major college, or they're rehabbing an injury or something that sets them back. So
No, I think
junior college baseball influence in college baseball is something that is really just kind of taken for granted.
I'd almost rather have JUCO guys than freshmen when it comes to baseball.
Well, you look at some of the great players they've had at South Carolina over the years, a lot of them are junior college transfers.
Right.
You know. All right. Thanks to Coach Kingston. He was fantastic. We appreciate it. So we've had Monty Lee. We've had Coach Kingston. We're going to try and get around the state to maybe 3 other places where baseball is a hot commodity, and visit with those coaches leading up to the start of the season on February 15th. Also coming up tonight, Mike Morgan will be here to kick off hour number 2, our Morgan on the Move segment on this Thursday night. Gary Parrish from CBS Sports with a visit in hour number 2 to talk about basketball and some good causes that he's involved with. We'll hear from Clemson coach Brad Brownell as he previews the game against NC State for the Tigers on Saturday. The Money Coach will be here. And, of course, recruiting, a lot of activity on the recruiting front. Tracking the Gamecock plane today, it made a couple of stops in the Atlanta area, and then it flew down to Pensacola, Florida for a big in-home visit tonight with Darius Washington. All the details on that is coming up. 800-956-7266 is our phone number. Our email, talkback@sportstalksc.com, and on Twitter @SportsTalkSC. Let's go to Glenn in North Charleston. Been a little while, Glenn. Hope you're doing well. Good to have you with us.
Doing well. Hope you all guys had a great holiday.
Yes, we did. Thank you.
I was wondering, I wish the PA or the disc jockey, like football, can be a little more descriptive. Because, you know, us blind people, we also go to ball games. It's hard to hear sometimes on what's going on defensively. Maybe it could be recapped a little bit with the PA system like they do in collegiate or professional football. That's why, because I have to tape my radio when everybody's hollering and everything. I got to tune in on you guys so when the game's on, then I can hear what's going on over the crowd. It's kind of hard to hear, so, you know.
They are limited. They, unfortunately, Glenn, are limited by what they could say, unfortunately. But from that standpoint, it's a I understand it's a unique issue for you, and like you said, hopefully the folks who do the broadcasts do an adequate job of describing what brings to the table.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate the phone call. 800-956-7266. One thing I have seen in recent years crop up in stadiums is transcription.
Doesn't help him.
No, it doesn't help him. No, I know that. I know that, but I'm saying for other people,
for the hard of hearing, they have that.
They've got the transcription.
Closed
they have it at
situation.
They've got it at USC, and I think I've seen it at Death Valley as well.
Yes, I think they're doing more ribbon boards next year. I think they're doing them there.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah. All right, thank you. 800-956-7266 is our phone number. Some good news for a current Gamecock and a former Gamecock as well. Caleb Kinlaw, reserve Gamecock running back, tweeted last night he's been given another year of eligibility, and he's not in the transfer Portal John. He is coming back to South Carolina. Missed all of last season with a torn ACL. He suffered in the preseason. Really a standout on special teams in his time at South Carolina. And then Nick Harvey tweeted that he, too, got a 6th year, and he also tweeted that he is transferring.
He's exploring transfer options.
Yeah.
What he says.
Yeah, okay. He's in the portal as well. And that one I really don't understand. I mean, like I said, I can't. I'm not in his shoes, and I don't know what he's been through and what his experience was like and what his relationship with people is like. But, if you're a DB and you're good and you think you're good, considering South Carolina's need in the secondary, I would think that you would stay and fight for a job at a place where you're already familiar with things.
I mean, I look. Go ahead, Pro.
No, I was about to say, maybe he's into a certain type of coaching that he thinks he can't get here, or either he's become a little bit reticent with the coaching.
Well, I know a two-time transfer. Now, after a certain number of transfers, people kind of start looking at you like, what's wrong with you?
Well, here's the other part of it. I mean, he did have the concussion injury that kept him out really the latter part of the season, and I'm wondering if maybe there was a mishandling there in his eyes or something along those lines, or maybe part of the reason why they kept him out is because they knew the writing was on the wall. He wasn't going to play another year here. So I think they might have been doing right by him just to be like, hey, if you're not liking it here and it's not necessarily your cup of tea, we'll let you sit out the rest of the year and try your luck elsewhere.
Yeah. 800-956-7266. The Charlotte Sports Foundation announced today that the Belk Bowl and the ACC Football Championship, you had USC in one game and Clemson in the other, combined for an economic impact of approximately $96.1 million. That includes $51.9 million in direct visitor spending to the Charlotte community. So that's good to know that the people of South Carolina were helping the people of Charlotte.
And USC will be in that kickoff game next year as well.
Yes, another trip to Charlotte. 800-956-7266 on the basketball front. A lot of action tonight involving state teams. Got a busy schedule. Gardner-Webb will be at Winthrop on ESPNU tonight at 7. Clemson women playing at NC State.
Number 1 team or number 8 team in the country, 18-0. So that's a graduated challenge for Coach Amanda Butler.
Upstate at Hampton, Coastal Carolina at Arkansas, Little Rock, Presbyterian at Campbell, Citadel at Greensboro, Charleston Southern at Radford, Elon is at the College of Charleston, UT Chattanooga is at Furman, and Sanford will be at Wofford.
What more can Wofford do, man? I mean, I'm telling you, this is a situation where you're almost, as far as they go, I think I'm almost at the point where some SoCon teams might be pulling for Wofford to run the table, and maybe from the standpoint of maybe getting a second team in there, if you can have somebody maybe upset the apple cart in the conference tournament from that perspective. I mean, that could be a situation where you're looking at basically them wanting to make that happen.
Well,
Wofford 7-0 in the conference, 15-4 overall. Greensboro is 6-1, 17-3 overall. East Tennessee is 6-2, Chattanooga is 5-2, and Furman is 4-3. Despite Furman's great record outside the league, they've got those 3 league losses, but they have played a tough road schedule here early in conference play. And they'll benefit from that down the stretch because they'll have those games at home.
Well, also they benefit from the fact that Villanova has gotten their act together, and they're going up in the poll. So that win even looks better for Furman than when they first got the victory. Also, Jay Moran is on tonight on ESPNU as Murray State plays Belmont, I think, in the late game on the U tonight.
Leading the nation in assists at 10 assists per game.
Could you imagine if he was here?
Yeah, I'd imagine he'd be quite good. We'll be right back.
These guys, they never sleep. Check them out on the web at SportsTalkSC.com. Now, more of Sports Talk on the South Carolina Radio Network.
Both coaching staffs for South Carolina and Clemson were on the move today as we are getting closer and closer to the second National Signing Day for the football teams. Of course, we had the big one in December, which had most of South Carolina and Clemson signees, and most of the signees of teams across the country, but still putting the finishing touches in the class of 2019, Corn.
Yeah, February 6th is the signing day number 2, and, there'll be a little bit of drama. It's not all used up in December, though most of it is. This one won't have quite the bang that December 20th had, but still there'll be some players taking it to Wednesday, February 6th before they announce. And South Carolina in particular still hanging with a few guys. Clemson still has a couple on the hook. As far as the update for today, USC assistants Travaris Robinson, John Scott met today in school with defensive lineman Jaquez Sorrells of Winter Park, Florida. This was Scott's first meeting with Sorrells. He plans to return next week. From what I can gather, it went very well, and Scott and Sorrells in particular got a lot of time together to get a chance to get to know one another. Now, Sorrells is still visiting Penn State this coming weekend, and he's going to Alabama as it stands now the following weekend. He was at South Carolina. He was at South Carolina, I think it was last weekend. So things are going well from a South Carolina standpoint with him. They remain very much in the picture, but competition is pretty stiff. Tony Morrell, the Big Spur, reported that Will Muschamp will have an in-home tonight with offensive lineman Darius Washington of Pensacola, Florida. Muschamp and his crew arrived in Pensacola around 1:30 this afternoon after the USC plane made a couple of stops in the Atlanta area for some recruiting visits. And they first went to the school, then they'll be heading to the home. Washington visited USC in September. Miami was in last night. He visited there last weekend. He has been committed to Mississippi State, and Florida State just offered and could be in line for a late official visit. USC 2020 offensive line commitment Isaiah Walker of Miami was offered by Mississippi State. He also picked up an offer from Louisville this week. 2020 receiver Xavier Capers of Alpharetta, Georgia, originally was scheduled to visit Clemson this weekend, but he has switched that to USC. He plans to reschedule Clemson. Capers had been a strong lean to the Tigers, but it's more open now. He said, quote, "My recruiting targets are completely open." Capers visited Georgia Tech last weekend and also plans to visit Arkansas and Florida. 2020 defensive tackle Xavier McIver of Cheraw and his teammate in the 20 class, receiver Jalen Coit, they were offered by Coastal Carolina. Now, McIver, who is 6'3", 275, has South Carolina right now as his favorite. The Gamecocks, along with Wake Forest, South Florida, Tulane, East Carolina, and now Coastal, are among his offers. He says he talks to the Gamecocks every morning. He talks to his recruiting coach, Eric Wolford, and they've been sending him new pictures of the facilities and things of that nature. And he said South Carolina being just 2 hours from his home makes South Carolina appealing as well. He has yet to talk to John Scott, the new defensive line coach, but he feels good enough about South Carolina to proclaim them as the favorite right now. But he is going to go to some summer camps to see what other interest and offers he might draw. He was going to visit Kentucky for a junior day this weekend, but he can't make it. Purdue and Nebraska are also showing interest. 63 tackles and 10 sacks for him last season. 2020 defensive lineman Tonka Hemingway of Conway was offered by Wake Forest. USC offered 2022 receiver Janiran Bonner, 6'2", 200 of Ellenwood, Georgia. Running back Michael Dukes of First Baptist is not taking a visit this weekend. He was at Clemson last weekend and was offered. He also has offers from Syracuse and ECU and visited both. He doesn't plan to announce until signing day. Cornerback DeQuantius Watts of Atlanta met at his school yesterday morning with Will Muschamp and Brian McClendon from USC. That was the extent of the in-person visits. Watts had basketball practice last night, so he was tied up with that. He took his official to USC last weekend. He'll visit Louisville this coming weekend. USC's Muschamp and McClendon were down in McDonough, Georgia on Wednesday. They offered receiver Justin Robinson, 6'4", 205. Said he was very excited about the offer. He's been to USC before to check out the stadium. He plans to make a recruiting visit this spring. Notre Dame, Virginia, Georgia, Wake Forest, and Coastal are also among his offers. 35 catches, 750 yards, and 13 touchdowns last season. 2020 defensive lineman Macias Scott of Gainesville, Georgia, plans to visit USC Saturday. 2020 receiver Keandre Lambert of Norfolk, Virginia, plans to be at Clemson this weekend. Clemson and USC are in his top 11. 2020 defensive lineman Trey Williams of Washington, D.C., plans to be at Clemson this weekend. And 2020 defensive end Brian Bresee of Damascus, Maryland, will visit Clemson this weekend with his parents. They're going to arrive Saturday morning and stay overnight. He was at Penn State last weekend. Clemson is in his final 6. And in basketball, to update 6'6" Christian Brown, formerly of AC Flora and Lower Richland, now at Oak Hill Academy. He's getting a lot of high praise from the analysts who have seen him this year, talking about his growth in terms of his game and his personality. He said playing against a national schedule has helped him quite a bit. He's averaging 12.5 points and nearly 5 rebounds per game, shooting 54% from the floor and 80% from the line. He has taken officials to Clemson, UNLV, and Georgia. The Tigers, he said, are keeping in touch. He still speaks with assistant coach Steve Smith often, he says. They are the hometown team in his mind. NC State, Pitt, and Illinois, he said, are also very involved with his recruitment recently. He hopes to make his decision before the April signing period rolls around. There you go with recruiting for tonight here on Sports Talk. Be sure to stay in touch with our recruiting and stay alert by following along on our website, SportsTalkSC.com, and on Twitter. Use the hashtag STRecruiting.
Not recruiting necessarily, but recruiting adjacent. 3 members of South Carolina women's basketball's #1 ranked recruiting signing class, Aaliyah Boston, Zia Cook, and Bree Beal, are all on the 42nd annual McDonald's All-American Games team, at least on the women's side. And there is one, at least prominent South Carolina native on the men's side, and that is Tennessee signee Josiah James of Porter Gown.
Yeah, great player. Speaking of Tennessee, Pro, watching that game last night, Tennessee Vanderbilt, what a ball game. And, Williams was fantastic. He was practically unstoppable. Some really close calls down the stretch of that game had an impact, but Vanderbilt still struggling to get that first SEC win, and Tennessee dodged a landmine on the road there as the #1 team in the country.
Yeah, you can almost say that on a night the Admiral went AWOL, Grant Williams took command. I mean, because Admiral Schofield, for whatever reason, was not ever in that game in my mind.
Yeah,
mentally. But Grant Williams, here's a guy, Phil, they say he's 6'7". I don't believe it. But here's a guy that maybe the ACC said, yes, you're a good low post player, but for your size, it's not what we want. And so Tennessee just tiptoes into Charlotte and takes him out of Charlotte, and he's become a star in the SEC. Tremendous player. 23 for 23 from the free throw line. That's incredible.
It's funny, you thought maybe after Tuesday that Chris Silva might have had SEC Player of the Week locked up, and then Grant does that. It's like, well, can't win.
South Carolina goes to Oklahoma State Saturday. Watch some of that game last night. They've only got 8 scholarship players.
Bad.
So this is a chance. You feel bad for Michael Boynton, but if South Carolina can go and stay out of foul trouble and play their kind of game, this would be a really nice road win in a historic building if they can go and get that on Saturday. And the Gamecocks would come home for a Tuesday night 6:30 tip. If Tennessee wins on Saturday, #1 team in the country, could have a full house for that one.
It is, by the way, called Historic Gallagher-Iba Arena. That is its official name. So there you go.
That's why it's an historic building.
Yeah.
But they got to take care of that business if they can. That would be certainly a good quality win for them in terms of the nets and everything else.
Be a notch on the belt.
Yeah. All right, hour number 2 coming up here on Sports Talk. Be right back.
Round 2 of Sports Talk up next with your hosts Phil Kornbluth, Will Pelagic, and the Professor Tom Hayes. Don't leave us hanging. Join the show. 800-956-7266.
We are back. Hour number 2 of Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. Phil Kornbluth, Will Pelagic, sitting here at Founders Park in Columbia. What a beautiful, beautiful scene it is. Beautiful night in Columbia. It's gotten a little chilly. We see the skyline of downtown Columbia beyond the center field wall. A lot of action will start here tomorrow with the opening of preseason practice. 3 scrimmages for the Gamecocks beginning tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday, open to the public. And you heard Coach Kingston talk about Fan Day coming up this weekend. They've got a women's clinic coming up as well in the near future. So they are ready to rock and roll with another baseball season, but right now we're still in the midst of a very hot basketball campaign.
And we sit at Founders Park, and Mike Morgan's time with us is brought to you by Founders Federal Credit Union, the mortgage team more equipped than ever to help you with the mortgage process. FoundersFCU.com/mortgage, and by BP Skinner Clothiers. People nationwide get their custom-made suits and accessories from Brent Skinner. The best in suits, shirts, pants, shoes, and more available to you. Located in Columbia, or you can visit their showroom in the Vista. Brent will come to you. BPSkinnerClothiers.com to set up an appointment.
All right, Mike Morgan joining us. And Mike, watching the games last night around the SEC, a tremendous game in Nashville. Tennessee able to pull that one out. LSU wins last night to stay undefeated in the league race. So you got to look at Tennessee. And, you know, I think the last time they were number 1, they went to Nashville and got beat. Nearly happened last night, but their great player, Williams, stepped up and saved them last night.
Grant Williams was phenomenal. 23 for 23 for the free throw line. You know, you got guys that if they shot 50 free throws, can't hit 23 of them, and they're starting for Division I schools. His performance was terrific, and you know we've talked about him before. He's just a tremendous story about a guy that was not highly recruited at all, was slated to go to an Ivy League school. Rick Barnes came in, and his mom was actually a little disappointed because she wanted to see her boy go to an Ivy League school. And he said, you know, I can get a great education in Knoxville and play in the SEC. People thought he was a little bit too chubby, too short to play the post in a conference like the Southeastern Conference. And all he's done is become one of the best players in the country. So the kind of guy that you root for, give hats off to Vanderbilt for even making that a game. You know, Bryce Drew, they're really shorthanded. The fact that game went in overtime, the fact that they were up, I believe it was 6 points with about a minute left to go, they really squandered it late. But, you know, good teams are able to fight adversity on the road, and that's what Tennessee did. I think what we're seeing now, and this is not that surprising, but the line of demarcation between Tennessee, LSU, and Kentucky, who has certainly come around, versus the rest of the league. Look, that second group is still pretty doggone good. Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and obviously the way South Carolina is playing would be in that conversation. But I don't think any of them are in the class of the top 3. I think there's a pretty strong line in terms of talent and in terms of just overall quality with those 3 schools compared to the rest of the league.
Speaking of the Gamecocks, 5-1 in the league. Big win over Auburn the other night in a game that they had a lead. It got away. Auburn went ahead. Gamecocks fought back. Chris Silva was huge on the boards and in points and at the foul line. That was just a massive win for South Carolina. They're 5-1, a third of the way through the league schedule. The question is, do you think they have the staying power to go, say, through the next third of the schedule with a 5-1 mark or maybe a 4-2 mark and really build a very nice-looking league record as they head to the last third of the SEC season?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, in the next 6 games, 2 of those games are against Tennessee and 1 is against Kentucky. If
Correct.
That is indeed the case, yeah, if that's the case, then, you know, that's a pretty tall order for anybody. So do I think that they're going to, you know, be 10-1? No. But I think they're already playing with house money. What we've learned out of a Frank Martin team, particularly at home, they have a way of taking a really good team and making them play not really good. Pardon the bad grammar, but they just do not. He is able to force teams like he did against Auburn to not play comfortable. And, it's kind of like people talk about the Patriots, Bill Belichick. He's going to find out your best offensive weapon. He's going to find a way to neutralize him. That's essentially what Frank Martin's defenses normally do. And you watch Harper and Bryce Brown, two all SEC caliber guards. And I don't want to say they were non-factors, but they were clearly not to the level that they normally are. So defensively, I think they'll be fine. I'd like to see Mania back. And when he comes back with the way that Lawson's coming along and Bryant's coming along, Silva looks like whatever funk he was in, it's over. Thank goodness. They're a legitimate. I don't think they're a legitimate contender to win the SEC. I think they're a legitimate contender to actually be in the NCAA tournament. And if anybody would have said that at the end of 2018, they would have been immediately sent to the local shrink. And now all of a sudden, it looks like a legitimate possibility.
Yeah, the 5 SEC games after the ACC Big 12 Challenge game against Oklahoma State, Mike, are home Tennessee, road Georgia, road Kentucky, home Arkansas, and road Tennessee. I think if you get out of that no worse than 2-3, maybe even 3-2 if you steal one, I think you're sitting pretty, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's being realistic. I will say that Oklahoma State game is big for a number of reasons. Number one, at this point in the season, Carolina's metrics are not great because he had a conference record was not great. You need to win that game. We don't know with all that's going on in Stillwater right now with the defections and everything else, how that team's going to perform. So you have a chance either to pick up a good quality win at a conference or to avoid a bad loss at a conference. One or the other. Either way, it's important to win the game because at the rest of the season, you're just playing, you're beating up and you're getting beaten up by teams in your own league. That makes it really hard to have significant strides in what we now call the net, kind of our new spiffed up version of the RPI, because the RPI has gone the way of the dodo. But I think that's a game that cannot be underestimated in terms of its importance. If this is going to be a true bubble team, that's a win you want to have. It's a loss you want to avoid. And then, like you said, go ahead, and you're not going to beat Tennessee twice. You might not beat Kentucky, but win the games you're supposed to win. Steal another one here and there like they have done already against teams like Auburn and Mississippi State and Florida for that matter, although I hesitate to think that Florida is really that good right now. But you're going to be in the conversation if you keep doing what you're doing, keep playing the way you're playing.
Yeah. I still have a dodo, by the way.
Yeah,
that's good.
I wanted to mention about a South Carolina player, but he plays with another team, and their team is struggling right now. Tom Crean trying to build something there at Georgia, but this kid Claxton, he's one of those guys to describe. He really seems to me doesn't have a position. It looks like a point guard one time. It looks like a forward the next time. What do you think about as he matures, what he can be?
I think he can be an NBA talent. I think he's 6'11". He's only going to put muscle on that very frail frame. He can handle the ball, he can shoot, and he can make noise down low. And although we hear people say that a lot about players, I think sometimes that's much more hyperbole than it is reality. In his case, I think it's more reality than it is hyperbole. He's that versatile of a kid. Now, he's completely flying under the radar because he's playing for a Georgia team and a Georgia program that has really struggled here in the last couple of years. But if he comes back for another year, and I hope that he does, he's got a chance to become an All-American type talent.
By the way, the biological name for the dodo is the Rhapis cuculatus.
It's not good.
It's good to know.
Yeah, take that with you on your next broadcast. You might open some eyes.
I will. I don't think I won't use that.
Thank you, Mike. Enjoy your weekend.
Guys.
We'll see you next week. Yeah, the dodo bird, Rhapis cuculatus, an extinct flightless bird. Does that mean it couldn't fly?
It could not fly. No.
Could not fly.
Our basketball conversation continues next with CBS Sports' Gary Parrish on Sports Talk.
Sports Talk is the sports talk show of Main Street, South Carolina. From the coast to the mountains, we cover it all.
Our basketball conversation continues on Sports Talk as we continue from Founders Park. We did a little baseball earlier with South Carolina head coach Mark Kingston, but we're deep in the round ball talk, and it's now time to bring in a man who has many titles next to his name, but of course, friend of the program, Gary Parrish, college basketball columnist for CBSSports.com and also analyst on the TV network, also hosts his own show in Memphis. He joins us on Sports Talk to talk about a pretty cool charity that both South Carolina and Clemson are involved with coming up on Tuesday, Gary. And it seems like we're going to be seeing a lot of green on the sidelines on South Carolina and Clemson sides next week.
You are. It'll be on Tuesday night. You're nice to bring it up. It's all in coordination with Coaching for Literacy, which is an organization started in Memphis, rooted in Memphis. That's my connection to it. But it has gone nationwide. And one of the reasons it was founded is because this is an unbelievable stat, but it is true. Nearly 2/3 of American fourth graders are reading below grade level right now. Like, we like to think of ourselves as this sophisticated and advanced nation, and in so many ways we are. But when it comes to the subject of literacy, we are failing our young people in a pretty undeniable way. And Coaching for Literacy is working hard to change that. What it does is work with sports teams like Clemson, like South Carolina, on Tuesday night to generate awareness about the importance of literacy and its impact on social issues such as employment, crime, poverty, and the economy. Because what studies have shown is that if you cannot read properly, you're going to struggle to get a job. You're going to be more likely to commit crimes. You're going to more likely than not live in poverty, so on and so forth. It's all connected, and Coaching for Literacy is designed to attack that. Like I said, started as a small project, but just a few short years later, it's conducted more than 100 Fight for Literacy games that have funded literacy projects across 16 different states and impacted more than 10,000 children. And next week's Fight for Literacy games involving Clemson and South Carolina are going to add to those numbers. So when you see Brad's staff and Frank's staff wearing green wristbands, green ties, green lapel pins, that's what it's about. And people can learn more at coachingforliteracy.org. That's coachingforliteracy.org. And I should point out one more thing. This is not raising money in the state of South Carolina that then is going to go to Memphis or LA or New York. The money is going to be reinvested in the literacy project in the state of South Carolina. So it's money generated there that's going to help the issue there.
Gary, we see college basketball coaches all season long involved in a variety of different good causes, wearing the sneakers, the V Week on ESPN, what you're involved with here, from what you can gather from covering the nation and the returns from all this. What kind of positive returns do you see from fans responding to what they see from the coaches?
Well, it's not just fans, but also businesses. Like, I think the reason, and I don't want to speak for the foundation, although I guess that's technically what I'm doing on some level. One of the things that they use the color green because it really stands out. If it was just blue or any other sort of normal color that you see people wear all the time, you might not even blink. But when people see green ties, green wristbands, green lapel pins, it's like, what is that? I can't tell you how many times I'm on TV. I will get a text message or a tweet from somebody. What is that green lapel pin? What does it represent? And it just starts the conversation. It literally just, raises awareness. And then it raises awareness, which raises money, because once businesses all across this country recognize that this is a real problem in America, then what we found is that they're anxious to help. And I can just tell you, on a very personal level, like, I've seen the impact that this can make on young people. In fact, one story that, I told before, not to you guys, I don't think, but I think sort of makes crystal clear exactly how this can change somebody's life. The reason this foundation was started, it was by a young man named Jonathan Wilfong, who actually started as the high school project. Jonathan was a basketball player, played grassroots basketball on the AAU circuit, but with other Memphis area kids. But Jonathan grew up very differently than most Memphis basketball players. Jonathan grew up in the suburbs. He's the product of, a two-parent family, college-educated parents. They live a certain life. And his teammates lived a very different life. A lot of single-parent homes, a lot of poverty, inner-city stuff. Well, what he noticed is that one of his teammates in particular, every time they'd go to a restaurant as a team to eat, He would just point to something on the menu. Like if there was a picture of lasagna, he'd order lasagna. If there was a picture of meatloaf, he would order meatloaf. And what they realized is the reason he was doing that, he couldn't read. He was just pointing to the pictures because he could not read what was on the menu. So they pulled him aside very quietly, very privately, and they worked with it, in a hands-on way. And not only did he get to reading at grade level, he actually got a football scholarship to go play at LSU, and he qualified academically as a freshman, and he graduated from LSU. So what Jonathan and his family realized is if we can, we really just save somebody's life. We really just change somebody's life. If we can do that to one person, why can't we do that to a lot of people? And Coaching for Literacy now is doing that for a lot of people.
Of course, we're talking with Gary Parrish of CBS Sports, a recognizable voice here who analyzes college basketball all across the country. And just from 30,000 feet, Gary, we'll start with Clemson just from the standpoint of where they sit. 1-4 in the ACC. It's been a rough start for them. They've played a very hefty schedule. What are your impressions on the Tigers trying to follow up a Sweet 16 appearance with Brad Brownell's squad?
Yeah, it's undeniably been disappointing, any way you measure it. They started preseason 14th at Ken Pom. Now they're 52nd. They actually got one first place vote in the ACC preseason poll. Now, I don't know why, but they did. And so to go from that to be sitting at 1-4, that's not the way this was supposed to play out. That said, their first league game was at Duke. Another league game was at Syracuse. Another league game was against Virginia. Another league game was at Florida State. So I don't know the point spreads on all those games, but I would assume that they were probably underdogs in each one of those that they lost. And so I think the context matters. But, this is life in the ACC. You're going to have to play the Dukes and the Syracuses and the Virginias and the Florida States. And so you got to beat some of them or else you're not what you were supposed to be. There's still time to get this thing turned around. But right now, they look like a good team as opposed to a really good team. They look like a team that is missing, two of its top three scorers from last season, because they are missing two of the top three scorers from last season. And that does seem to be having some impact. They're not as good offensively. They're not as good defensively. Almost none of the numbers are where you'd want them to be or where you expected them to be.
Gary Parrish with us here on Sports Talk. South Carolina, 5-1 in the SEC. Obviously, all the pundits have to be surprised. The question to you is, with the schedule they've played, but what they've got coming up, have they showed you enough to convince you that maybe they can survive the upcoming run of games against Kentucky and Tennessee and a little bit tougher schedule, and perhaps get up around the 9-10 mark in SEC play?
It's interesting. I think you're reasonable. It's reasonable to be skeptical if that's what you're suggesting, because it's interesting. I hadn't thought about this in advance, but Clemson and South Carolina, like one is headed the right direction in the SEC, the other headed the wrong direction in the ACC. And I think both of those league records, are schedule induced. Like I think Clemson might be better than you realize, but just like it's had to play who it's had to play in those first 5 games. So what are you going to do? And I think South Carolina might not be as good as the 5-1 record suggests, because, we went through Clemson's and that was just a nightmare. You look at what South Carolina's done in the league. At Florida, that's surprising because even though Florida's not good, the computers still have Florida as the top 30 team. So that's a good win. That's going to be on Selection Sunday, if it matters at all. If you're in the at-large conversation, that's going to be a quadrant 1 win. But then you get a Mississippi State team that's struggling, get them at home. I mean, it's a nice win. You'd rather win it than lose it, but it's not crazy. It's not like beating Duke or Virginia. You get Missouri at home. That's supposed to be a win. You go to Vanderbilt, and despite what we saw last night when Vanderbilt took Tennessee to overtime, Vanderbilt's not good. And then the other win is over an Auburn team that clearly isn't as good as it was last season and has been having its own problems. And so I guess big picture, I would simply say when you go from starting 4-7 to then going 5-1 in your first 6 league games, let's just not nitpick it and be happy that you're now stacking wins as opposed to losses. But if you want to nitpick it, I think you can intelligently and reasonably do it and be skeptical that this is going to hold up over the course of the schedule, because even though they are 5-1 right now, Ken Pom does project them to finish just 9-9 in the league.
Yeah. Gary, always appreciate the time. We'll do it again soon. Thank you so much for the time and the work that you're doing with the Literacy Foundation.
You guys were really kind to have me. Thank you for doing that.
That's Gary Parrish, CBS Sports. We'll continue. Sports Talk as we continue. Really appreciate the time with Gary Parrish. We are limited by our hard out. Wish we could have gotten some more basketball in, but certainly the time about the worthy cause is a good one, and we'll get him on again pretty soon. And he makes a good point about both South Carolina and Clemson and the juxtaposition between the two of them, where as South Carolina has benefited from, I don't want to say he probably didn't give as much credit to South Carolina's schedule as I would have, just because the fact that you do have two ranked teams on there that you've beaten. But the fact that the Clemson schedule is such to where it has been completely a high degree of difficulty could possibly look a lot different, say, a week or two from now.
Well, the Gamecock strength of schedule is 26th in the country to this point. And their non-conference strength of schedule is okay at 66. So they've played a good schedule, but I wanted to say that we're talking about what's ahead for South Carolina, and the schedule is difficult. But, they could get into a little situation here if they play good basketball, that they could get in kind of a win-loss-win run here. For example, win at Oklahoma State, which I think is a reasonable possibility. All right, lose to Tennessee at home. Though it's a home game, and funky things happen when you're at home, but let's just don't be crazy. But then go to Georgia.
Should win.
Well, I'm not going to say should, but could win on a Saturday afternoon. Then go to Kentucky and lose. All right. But then Arkansas comes to Columbia.
Should win.
Should be a win. So you're 3-2 in that stretch. Then you go to Tennessee, going to lose. So you're 3-4. Then you get Texas A&M at home.
Should win.
That's 4-4. So you're 4-4 at that point, and
you're 14-12 overall.
And how many SEC wins? What?
9-5. You're 9
Now let's see. A win against Georgia, a win against Arkansas, 3 SEC wins. That gives you 8.
Yes.
And 3. You're 8-4.
8-4.
8-4.
But you're 5-1 now.
You got to beat. I tell you, a swing game for them. There's 2 swing games coming up at home and 1 on the road. Ole Miss, Alabama at home. Actually, 2 on the road. Missouri and Texas A&M.
You should be.
And then Georgia at home.
Missouri is god awful.
I tell you what, I think they've got a chance if they stay healthy. They get Minaya back, and he decides to play. If he decides to play and can play at a high level, that gives that'll put somebody else on the bench that's going to help extend that bench.
This is what you need. You need sweeps against the teams you should beat: Missouri, A&M, and Georgia. You should beat Alabama at home, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And if you can get one of the 2 splits there with Mississippi State or Ole Miss, something like that, and maybe steal another game against Tennessee or Kentucky. I mean, that's the difficult part.
Well, I'm not so sure. You talk about Alabama. You do get them at home, but Alabama's RPI's a net is 41 and South Carolina's 102. So, I mean,
they just beat the Ken Palm 17. And they beat 27.
Who's that?
I look
at Carolina.
Yeah. But I mean, Alabama, they're 12-6, and they've got some nice wins on their schedule as well. But yeah, at home, I would say that Alabama is a game South Carolina can win. Not so sure you would say should win, but I think they can win it.
You can win, but let's face it, Alabama has always been a tough matchup for South Carolina in recent years because of their length.
Yes.
And they are very aggressive. South Carolina, it would be very difficult for them. Some of those passes they throw, they have to be crisper in a ball game against Alabama, because Alabama will steal you blind. But the key point is, I'm just looking forward to Oklahoma State, because the way these schedules are done in basketball teams, who would have thought that Tennessee would walk into Nashville and struggle against a team that doesn't have one conference win?
And with Clemson, conversely, you have North Carolina State on Saturday. Then you have home Pittsburgh, home Wake Forest. Those last 2 you should win. And then away Georgia Tech. You won there last year, and you beat them pretty easily at home. You should win that game. And maybe if you steal either North Carolina State or Virginia Tech, you're looking at a much different situation going into that Miami contest on the road. And maybe you think about possibly getting that one. It could all break right for them, but they need a lot to happen for them in a hurry. But as head coach Brad Brownell says, the panic button's not been pressed yet. At least we said that it probably hasn't been pressed
yet. We're going to push our panic button. Can we push our button for Brad Brownell so he doesn't push the panic button? Brian?
Our team's disappointed that we're not winning some of these games, but I think our guys have played pretty hard. I thought we played really well against Georgia Tech, and I thought we played well for a long time against Florida State. And, it's a hard schedule, and these are really good teams, and you have to play at a high level for 40 minutes to win, and we just haven't been able to quite put the full 40 together in some of these games, and some of that's probably the competition. Some of it's just not been our ability to finish, and but guys are still coming to practice, and we have good attitudes and working really hard. And, you know, we got some work in this morning. That was good. And, you know, we're excited to practice again here at 3.
Coach, you touched on it there. This is the second straight road game. You're playing a pressing defense. They like to trap in the corner. You feel like your experienced backcourt will be able to handle that pretty well like they did at Florida State?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. There's going to be some turnovers, but we certainly, you know, practice for it. We were very prepared at Florida State, and, you know, we had a little wrinkle that we put in that was very effective for us offensively for a while. You know, and we'll have to really execute. They're a hard team to play against. It's a difficult environment, and they put a lot of pressure on you. And so our guards are going to have to play well again. And you know, I thought Eli showed some improvement in that we knew going into the Florida State game that he was going to have the ball in his hands some, because that would be the guy that could make catches. And you know, he had 5 assists and maybe 1 or 2 turnovers. And was very efficient. He played a terrific game, minus a couple defensive errors late. But it was one of his better all-around offensive games in terms of making decisions and having to make decisions. I thought he was terrific. So, you know, that's the nature of when you play 2 or 3 or 4 teams in this league that play that way. Your other guys are going to have the ball some too, because, you know, teams are denying Shelton and Marquise a lot.
At this point in the season, if you had to put your finger on what the identity of this team is, what is it?
I think we're still looking for, like, maybe exactly what it is. I don't know that we've played as well as we would like on either end. I think, you know, there are times when I think defensively we've been very good, and the Virginia game and Syracuse game, I thought we defended really well. Offensively, we struggled. I thought, you know, for most of the game against Florida State, offensively, we were pretty good. Our defense failed us in the last 8 minutes. So we haven't been as consistent as we would like to be on either end. And that's why we're 1-4 in the league. That has to change.
Yeah, I mean, if you would have told me that you held Syracuse to 61 in their building and Virginia to 63 in their building, given the way that Clemson usually plays offensively with its efficiency, you would have said that those could have possibly been in the win column. But the fact remains is that they couldn't score against Virginia's suffocating defense. They had problems against Syracuse's zone. And with the Florida State game, conversely, Florida State scored 77 points against you. You give up 77 points, you're not beating very anybody in that conference.
Yeah, you know, they went through that stretch there when Reed was hurt. They missed him. And Shelton Mitchell, again, we wonder, you know, Brownell says that his knee continues to give him some problems. You wonder how healthy he is. But, yeah, it's been I have to pin this on the schedule. I just think that, you know, they're playing some really good teams. And they are a good team. I mean, I look at their starting 5 unit looks very talented to me. You got the strong post presence. You got a big forward who can score from the outside. I mean, 4 of your 5 starters are really good scorers now. You know, Skara can sometimes come up with a big offensive game for you, but he helps you on the defensive side.
Well, that's the problem, is that you're not getting consistency from all 5. 1 or 2 of them will drop out and have a disappearing act, and that's something that can't afford to happen.
I think this thing's going to reverse for them. I don't think it'll start Saturday, but I think when they get home to play Pitt on Tuesday night, I think they can start swinging things their way. Be right back.
Now back to Sports Talk, South Carolina's most listened to sports talk show for more than 30 years.
Before we get to the money coach, Fran Halloran, we have some scores to update. Also some golf.
Yes. Yes, yeah. And before we do that, I want to thank Kent Reichert, the sports information director for baseball at South Carolina, for working with us and bringing Mark Kingston to us and allowing us to barge into the baseball press box. We're in the play-by-play booth used by the Swami, Tommy Moody, and the play-by-play voice, Derek Scott. We appreciate them letting us borrow their facility tonight to visit with the coach. And again, thanks to Mark Kingston for being with us. As far as basketball scores go tonight, Presbyterian and Campbell are tied at 37 at the half. It's the College of Charleston leading Elon 33-26. That's at the half. Furman with a 31-23 lead on Chattanooga. That's at the half. Hampton is leading Upstate 47-30 at halftime. We've also got tonight Wofford, and Wofford is losing at the half to Samford, 49-43, playing at home. Winthrop is beating Gardner-Webb 47-26 at the half, and Charleston Southern has a 50-43 lead on Radford. Got a couple of SEC games tonight. NC State playing at Louisville. Again, Clemson should benefit by having a few extra days compared to NC State. NC State's got to play on the road tonight, then turn around and play a 2 o'clock home game on Saturday. And you've got Miami at Syracuse tonight.
You got the women's basketball team of Clemson playing at NC State at Reynolds Coliseum. It's 30-25 at the break. The golf, they're playing.
Who's winning?
Torrey Pine, 30-25 NC State. Excuse me, I should have clarified that. Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines this weekend. John Rahm carded a 10 under 62 on the North Course today. Justin Rose and Doug Gim one shot back at 9 under. CT Pan is at 8 under. Jordan Spieth at 7. Among the locals, Billy Haas at -5, Scott Brown -2, Sam Saunders even par after playing the South Course. Kyle Stanley 1 over. Tiger Woods shot a 2 under 70 on the Torrey South Course in La Jolla.
All right, time to welcome in the money coach, Fran Halloran, to a Sports Talk for our Thursday night gathering. And the transfer market in college sports heating up now with what I call the NCAA transfer portageon. I got to get it right. Portageon, where apparently you go to deposit your career for another start somewhere else. But you have some thoughts about all this transferring and what it means financially to the schools.
Good evening, guys. Yes, I do. And I got to tell you, I think what is happening is proving the point that I often make, that college football may as well just call itself what it is. It's the farm leagues for the NFL, because we're getting further and further and further away from the idea of student athlete. The world of college football, the world of college sports changed drastically a couple of years ago when we decided that these young people who were already getting very large scholarships and other perks that went with those scholarships, let's be honest, clothing and shoes and things like that, we decided that wasn't enough. And, you know, I'm not necessarily against them getting stipends. But we decided a few years ago that they needed to get paid. And we gave them the cost of attendance stipend. And I've talked about that before. It varies. Some schools give their kids a couple $100 a month. Some schools give their kids $600 a month. But these players are now being paid. So in essence, they are employees since they're getting paid. And in the business world, when you have a valuable employee, an asset to your company, you know, someone who might know your secrets or has very important relationships out there in the business community, or maybe they're the face of or even the voice of a division within the company or the company itself, if one of those key people, one of those valuable assets decides they're going to leave, right? 9 times out of 10, they're going to have a non-compete. I had to deal with that. And I was not necessarily a valuable asset when I left working for the company I worked for previously before I struck out completely on my own. But I had a non-compete for 12 months. Our good friend, Kevin Cohen, he had a non-compete when he lost his job. This is pretty common in the world. Now, you can always file injunctions and get a lawyer and go to court and try to fight these things. But the companies are going to fight like crazy to protect their interests.
And sometimes, too, Money Coach, those non-competes, they'll still come into play even if you are, say, let go. Like if you're axed, those non-competes don't go anywhere.
That's exactly right. Most of the time, a non-compete stays in place whether you were fired or whether you left on your own. I left on my own, and I still had to deal with a non-compete for 12 months. So this idea now that the athletes should be able to leave whenever they want to and move on. I'll give you an example. Last year, Shea Patterson and the 5 kids from Ole Miss, right? They got an attorney, and the attorney fought the NCAA. And this just goes to show how poorly administered the NCAA is. One attorney, 6 kids, all 6 kids are eligible immediately. Waiver, right? This year, Justin Fields at Georgia. Same thing is going to happen. Same attorney has been employed. So the idea that the NCAA can even stand on its own 2 feet against these rules is a whole other argument. But the point of the matter is these kids, now that they're getting paid on top of the scholarships, they're employees. And it's my opinion that the schools have a right to say, you committed to us, you are getting paid by us, you don't get to leave free and clear. You're going to have to sit out. Now, I'll tell you, this is all going to end up in the courts, guaranteed. It's going to end up in the courts.
You're saying they're getting paid, but they don't consider it as a paycheck. I mean, they don't pay taxes. There's nothing withheld. There's no benefits kept from the money. I mean, it's not really viewed as employment. It's not. The NCAA doesn't want it looked at like it's employment.
Right. But when this goes to court, and I guarantee you it will, because after Justin Fields and his attorney get their way on his immediate eligibility at Ohio State, and that's going to happen, you mark my words, the NCAA is going to be in a frenzy because now they will have lost, I don't know, half a dozen or more cases, challenges to the rule, and that's going to open the floodgates. More and more kids, when they're not happy with their playing time, when they're not happy about their coach leaving. And by the way, the coach is able to do what he wants. He can leave and go where. That's the coach's prerogative. He's been doing this 20, 30 years. When you've been doing this 20 or 30 years, you get that prerogative too. You're not there yet. You're a kid playing a sport. Shut up, play the sport, take your scholarship, take your stipend.
I agree with you on that, but I mean, in today's world, a lot of people don't see it that way. I mean, they see the players as being the breadwinners, and if a coach can up and break a contract and go somewhere else for a bunch more money without any penalty outside of a buyout, why can't a player?
Well, the biggest problem is the fact that the power used to solely be in the eyes and in the hands of the coaches and the schools, and now the power dynamic has shifted to the players, and that has made the coaches and those who cover the sport uncomfortable. But I think the initial mission is the same, is if it can turn ugly for you very, very quickly, especially if you were given promises that you couldn't keep or promises were made that they couldn't keep. I mean, I think that there still should be an ability for freedom of movement because, again, so much of this is built on things that are not necessarily followed through on.
Well, guys, it's great being with you tonight. I appreciate it as always. Thank you for letting me throw my 2 cents worth about business and sports. And if anybody wants to talk with me, easy to find me, 888-779-2557. Happy to be here with you guys this evening. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Coach. Always good hearing from you. The money coach, Fran Halloran, with us here on Sports Talk. Yeah, I mean, that is, it's one of those arguments that just goes round and round and round. Should players be paid, like they are employees? I happen to think a college scholarship is worth a ton of money. A 4-year scholarship is worth over $100,000 in most places. That's not bad while you're a teenager and a young adult to have all your college expenses taken care of. All right, that'll do it. Have a great night. Thanks to everybody at USC. We'll see you tomorrow.